Hi everybody, it's Carol Salter here, about to read from the penultimate chapter of Witch on the Warpath. Last time, all our people had made it onto the island of Thanet. We had Onk, Hearty, Shine and Dog in the Westwood, and Gristle, not a quarter of a mile away in Westwood Cross, going to sleep in a camping shop. Let's see what happens today. Chapter 34, The Showdown. Panicking, the Muglump jumped down the enchanted, multifolded path. He was petrified about being late. There was a specific time at which to perform the annual renewal chant. The ritual prevented dissolution and deterioration of the enchanted castle, keeping it in pristine condition through the ages. Thus, the maiden held within its grasp was sustained. When the enchantment was first placed, elders and witches tried their hardest to break it, but the stone witch's magic had been far too powerful. Stone was her medium, and her skills were considered the finest in the dimensions. Some actually perished trying to free the trapped maid. Others were pulled inside the enchantment, their essence absorbed into the foundations without trace. None of them had a clue what the conditions were to release the maiden. However, enchantments were known to deteriorate over excessive periods of time, and they didn't want that to occur. They came to the fateful decision, if they couldn't revive the maiden, they would ensure her continuation, on the slim chance the enchantment might one day in the future be fulfilled. Creatures living on Tanith Island were given the task of maintaining and caring for the castle until such time as the enchantment attained its destiny. Mumbling quietly, the Muglump tried to remember the exact words of the autumnal incantation as he moved along the trail towards the sacred site, shedding loose hairs like a cat in summer molt. The house of Flimpasset has been performing this renewal ritual since the beginning. I, Parsley Flim, will not be the first to bring shame upon my house, Parsley mumbled. Down the generations, the importance of the renewal ritual had been entwined into the makeup of this race of creatures. It was as much a part of a Muglump's being as breathing. Over time, continual immersion in the magic field of the invisible castle had bombarded their DNA with trans-dimensional matter, suffusing and altering their genetic code. It resulted in radical changes which afforded the Muglumps a highly prized ability: shape-shifting. Muglumps could change form into any living being of roughly their own shape and size. Most of them grew to about 2 feet. They were clever, kind, and covered in fur, so long and luxurious it made their original design shape impossible to distinguish. Not that many of them bothered. Families existed as fox, cat, dog, or weasel, depending on which form they chose for a given period of time. Younglings changed so often, their parents had developed an acute sense of smell. They could tell their offspring apart by scent, which was handy in a shape-shifting community. This particular Muglump, Parsley, of the house Flimpasset, had yet to perform the ritual alone. Today was his first time, and he was late. Lateness would not be tolerated, could not be tolerated, for it might, Parsley had been indoctrinated, affect Muglump's communities too. Who knew what might happen if another trans-dimensional shift occurred? The correct timings had been drummed into Parsley, along with his ancestors who performed this ritual before him. Any lapse would result in catastrophe to the enchantment, an event so devastating the consequences were not worth thinking about. Shuddering as he thought what he might be responsible for, and immersed in his own thoughts, Parsley didn't notice anyone else in the Westwood grounds. He came skidding to a messy stop at the end of the magical path, spraying grass, hair and earth in all directions. Luckily for him, he thought, no one saw his ungainly entrance. Once he was certain where the exact middle of the clearing was, even though a house stood there, Parsley turned his mind inwards. He shifted and translocated between dimensions. Then he rushed forward to the middle of the sacred grass circle, focusing on fulfilling his essential role as quickly as possible. Looking down at the grass, he counted in his head, pacing the specific number of steps back out again towards the rim, translocating back into Earth's dimension as he went. He moved to stand on the very edge of the grass ring, arms outstretched, eyes closed, if you could have seen them, head tilted to the heavens. He remained like this for several seconds, working through the equations in his mind. It had been so much easier before humans built the house 100 years ago, he thought for the 1,000th time. Taking a deep breath, he opened his eyes and searched for his monocle, which was around his neck, somewhere. Drawing out the sacred parchment from what he thought of as a pocket here having a general meaning since fur doesn't actually have pockets, Parsley flattened down his body fur so it looked less frenzied cute kitten and more smooth oily otter. Clearing his throat, Parsley sang the solemn words which started the autumnal service, the 8th time since his ordination as deputy, and now the first as actual caretaker. Believing himself to be alone, he recited the words of power handed down from his father and his father's father before him, and so on since the beginning. Parsley's voice rose, sweet and melodic, into the ether. After the initial first lines, another, deeper, feminine voice joined his poignant refrain. On and on the two voices sang, merging on certain notes as they reached each other through time and space. The deeper voice a descant to the muglump's soprano trill. At the end of his recital, Parsley stood in reverent supplication in front of the vast cathedral of space on the pure, pristine grass. Finishing the long autumn benediction, Parsley recited the final phrases which every muglump learnt by heart. Keep safe, honoured one, keep safe till time's run. Keep safe within this wall till one shall come to free us all. Stand still, stand high, a sacrifice to all is nigh. Having recited his verse, the small furry caretaker stood at his preordained position, a spot 6 paces out from the edge of an otherwise ordinary piece of grass. Parsley ran back to the middle and paced again in the opposite direction, where he moved to repeat the last short poem phrase again. This done 4 times to the points of the compass, he ran back to the edge of the grass, and bowing with his back to the path, he ended the ritual with a short 2-line verse of thanks. I take my leave, though beauteous rose, I wish that you were free. I'll come again another time and sing sweetly to thee. Bowing low, Parsley shuffled backwards from the grass to the very edge of the path. He remained unaware of the others, his back to them, as he waited and watched to see if his efforts had any effect. Onk woke first. The beautiful low descant voice called to him in a dream filled with sadness and longing. His consciousness rose like a bubble in water, meandering upwards towards the surface. Conscious now, he listened, and smiling, opened his eyes. Onk observed the small creature in the distance, singing to the sky. No, not the sky, to the earth. Without turning, Onk knew the others were awake and listening to the creature too. The last twinned note hit the breeze and ebbed away into the echoing silence. They watched Parsley as he covered the compass points, spoke his final verse of gratitude, then backed away from the circle. He stood leaning forward at the edge of the grass, waiting, ever optimistic, ever hopeful, to hear his last refrain receive its reply, as had been foretold. The clearing stayed quiet, as it had done for generations before him. Standing up straight, with a heavy heart, Parsley turned to go, and froze in place. For the first time he spied Onk the troll and Dog the dragon. Hearty and Shine watched from the trees high above, their presence unnoticed, but here in front of him, mere inches away from his face, was a gigantic hungry troll and a fire-breathing dragon. Mewling like a small kitten, Parsley Flimpasset fainted, crumpling onto the grass and turning into a ginger cat in the process. Not a good idea, with a hungry troll in the vicinity. "Well, there's something you don't see every day," quipped Hearty, floating down from the regenerated oak tree overhead. And then the world came apart at the seams. The solid iron gates blew off their hinges with the noise of a thunderclap launching halfway down the path. And though the occupants within the woods couldn't see, they guessed what the appalling racket signified. The sound of metal ripping itself apart, then hurling end over end, over and over towards you, no matter how magical, is unmistakable. The noise stopped. A deafening silence returned to the woods, a silence born of terror, as the woods watched and waited, listening for the next step in the trail of devastation. Gristle had had enough of the hexed path, so she ended it, braying something about twiddle-twaddle that could be heard up to half a mile away. The spell on the path collapsed with a deep, gut-tearing groan. Gristle was propelled along its length at great speed as it unravelled, stopping just in front of an unconscious ginger mugglump cat. Looking down at the flea-bitten, presumed dead orange cat at her feet, Gristle treated it to a savage kick. She watched with satisfaction as it hurled across the space, catapulted into a large beech tree opposite. The inert pile of orange fur slid down the tree trunk, settling in a matted heap at the bottom, silent and still. Giggling, Gristle strode forward, behaving like a Victorian battleship under full sail, prepared to meet an armada and ready to blow amidships. "Where's that blasted troll?" she boomed. Gristle had reached her limit. She was determined to finish this chase once and for all. She batted aside the pathetic adolescent dragon that dared try to stop her entering the circle of empty grass. Everyone heard the deep, anguished growl which matched Dog's frightened yelp. It was several octaves lower and louder, but unmistakably familiar, as Dog was jettisoned backwards across the glade to land next to Parsley in a second heap under the same beech tree. Unlike Parsley, Dog struggled to his feet. Blood ran from one nostril, and a small cut appeared on his forehead where he had struck a root sticking out of the ground. He was okay, but concussed and confused, he wasn't ready to rejoin the fray. Onk, enraged by the treatment of his faithful friend, roared a defiant challenge to the witch. The sound shook the bedrock, causing the trees nearby to tremble. Onk hurled himself across the grass towards the creature that dare injure his beloved dog. The two combatants entered the arena, ready to do battle. Shine and Hearty watched from the sidelines. With a start, Hearty realised this was Onk's destiny. The two of them, Onk and Gristle, had been destined to meet, to fight. No amount of running around England or hiding could have prevented this moment. "What have I done?" Hearty moaned. "All I've succeeded in doing is delaying the inevitable." Shine fluttered over to sit next to Hearty. "What do you mean?" she asked, taking Hearty's left hand and patting the back of it. "They were destined to meet, Shine," he replied, removing his hand and turning to her. "All I've done is altered the time and place of their showdown." Hearty lowered his head and shook it in disbelief. "I should have left well alone. I should have let them have it out in London on Onk's home turf. The duel should have been fought where Onk knew the terrain and was familiar with its occupants. I shouldn't have dragged the poor fellow halfway across the south of England to make a stand in some goddess forsaken place where Onk doesn't know, with a hateful creature he's never met. It's too late to change things now. What a fool I am." While Hearty sat berating himself on a branch, Shine floated down to Dog and Parsley to see if there was anything she could do. Dog shuffled over to Shine, whimpering, but Parsley remained unconscious. She knelt, hoping the cat was okay, moving its limbs to a more restful position. Stomping to the edge of the grass circle, Onk issued his challenge. "Go home, witch!" he roared, putting a lot of feeling into the word witch and instigating a small gale with his roar, tearing leaves off several of the surrounding trees. Gristle, though surprised by a troll with 3 words, refused to be intimidated out of pure bloody-mindedness. The waft of the troll's breath was sufficient to kill nearby saplings. It was better than DDT, but Gristle refused to be deterred. She was more than a match for a mere city troll, even if he did speak 3 words. Besides, she wanted that fairy babe more than ever. Gristle stood her ground, so Onk roared his challenge again. "Go home, witch!" he bellowed for a second time. This time the words dripped with fury as they fell from his snarling lips. He placed his hands on his ample hips in an angry, intimidating posture. At this point in the proceedings, most animals living in the wood had the good sense to leave. Gristle gave her wickedest smile back to Onk. It was a smile that killed 3 beech saplings and burnt the grass for metres in all directions. Still smiling, she lifted her left foot and unknowingly stamped into the enchanted circle to face her enemy. Several things happened at once. Gristle began reciting her first spell. She'd spent many hours sweating over a spell evil enough for an annoying troll. The air started to shimmer and sparkle across the glade. One second it was a calm, crisp autumn morning, the next the ether was alive with magic. And unfortunately for Gristle, it wasn't part of her spell. Continuing her casting, because ruination followed if she hesitated, Gristle could only look on helplessly. The shimmering grew wilder and wilder, and the sky above darkened. Solidifying into being was the biggest medieval castle Gristle had ever seen. It towered over her and Onk, both of whom stood now within its ivy-covered inner courtyard. The Victorian house was gone from view, could have easily fit inside one room of the mighty castle, and probably did. It was all turrets and crinoline walls. It was Goth before Goth was invented, and then some. It was the most spectacular backdrop to a battle Gristle had ever wanted. It was the stuff of her dreams and the source of legends. Her face cracked into a huge, ugly leer. This was a good omen, she decided, and grinning, she cast out her first spell. And that's where we're going to leave it today. See what happens between Onk and Gristle in the last chapter of Witch on the Warpath. Goodbye.